please join me in a really warm welcome for Dr. Steve Smith. Welcome, Steve.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is a topic that I'm really excited about and have some history with. Now, as Charlene mentioned, I teach in a place at the UCSB called the College of Creative Studies. And this is like a weird little unit within the UCSB system where really bright students come in from high school and they're kind of ready for almost graduate level work in their particular field. So there are majors in physics and math and art and literature, marine science, computer science. And really, these are the students who are prepared to take on graduate level work almost from right out of the box at their time here at UCSB. And all the classes are really small and very unique. And they tend to be kind of an odd sort of student. And I learned about it just a few years ago. And I said, wow, this is a place I really want to get involved with because this is like an exciting intellectual atmosphere. And it really, really turned my knobs. And so I went over there as a psychologist, but they don't have a psychology major over there. And so I said, you know what? Here's this college, the College of Creative Studies, and there's never been a class taught on creativity. Well, that's a little ironic that they have this whole College of Creative Studies and no one's ever taught a class on creativity. So I delved into literature, and one of the things that I knew from my time is just in my training as a child clinical psychologist about all the importance of creativity in child development and child growth, and the act of creativity, how that starts from the seeds that we plant with children and how that then grows into lifelong creative exploits and creative growth. And so for a number of years now, I've been teaching a class on creativity. And also for a number of years, I've been going to a yearly conference on creativity that happens every year in Oregon. It's phenomenal. We all get together and we talk about the science of creativity. What does it mean to be creative? What are creative people like? What is the importance of creativity in our modern society? And so those are some of the things I hope to touch on here tonight. And really with a particular focus on where does creativity fit within the larger sociocultural time that we find ourselves in, and really more importantly, where does the time that we find our children find themselves in? Okay, so my outline for the day is really talk first about creativity. Like, what does it mean? And then I want to move on more towards about how to foster more creativity in children. Or more to the point, how do we remove the barriers to creativity in children? Because children don't need us to help them be more creative. The truth is they just need us to get out of the way of their creativity. And so the thing I want to start with first is just a definition. And unfortunately, because it is an academic discipline, no one can agree on what the definition of creativity is. But really, the number of definitions about what does it mean to be creative tend to converge on a number of attributes. And it really seems like it's this: an original, surprising, and appropriate way to solve a problem. And I'll say that again: an original, surprising, and appropriate way to solve a problem. And other definitions of creativity include, that it has to be, that it's a personal expression of some sort, or potentially aesthetically pleasing, or even reflective of a system of values. We hear that in some cultures too, that it has to reflect a system of values. But no matter what, there's some sense in the literature and how we talk about creativity that something can't be creative unless it's original, new, and appropriate. And the appropriate piece is important here because we can come up with lots of creative ideas that are inappropriate. So, for example, even here in Santa Barbara, there's too much traffic on the 101. And one solution to that would be to widen it to 30 lanes. Well, that's original. It may be surprising, but not necessarily appropriate. So we always have to think about an appropriate way to solve a problem that is creative and surprising. Okay. So broad definition first. And so what is it that people need to be creative? And here, as we talk about creativity, I want us to think beyond art and beyond literature and beyond things that we kind of think of as being creative, because science is also creative, engineering is creative, and that creation is often not the kind of creativity that we think of. And really here in our conversation, I want us to think more broadly about what does it mean to create? Well, you can create knowledge in science, you can create technology, you can create engineering solutions to problems that are creative. So although our minds might drift to things more like art and literature and dance or other ways of expressing ourselves creatively, I want us to think about other ways of being creative too. So the question is, like, what is it that people need to be creative? Well, do they need to be smart? No, like literature is pretty clear on that. For the most part, creativity is unrelated to things like IQ scores. Now, if you're trying to be creative in like theoretical particle physics, like it probably is going to help you to have some extra IQ points. But generally speaking, there's not much relationship between IQ scores or raw intellectual horsepower and creativity. Do creative people need to be good at school? No. So achievement test scores and how well children perform in school, and also things like the SATs, those tend to not correlate with creativity scores either. So, so the notion of creativity, there's some personality attributes that go along with that. You know, people who are a little bit less conscientious and neat tend to be thought of as being a little bit more creative. But generally speaking, there aren't that many creative attributes. And you know, some of the leading researchers in creativity just say everybody can be creative. Creativity is not something that some people have and other people don't. Everybody has capacity to be creative and to be playful with their thoughts. Okay, so let's talk here a little bit about children and creativity in children. And what are the characteristics of creative children? So children who are generally seen as being more creative or who will score higher on measures of creativity. And what we find is that creative children tend to be flexible in their thinking, able to pull together all sorts of different ideas, even if those ideas don't necessarily fit super well from an adult perspective. Creative children often have an odd sense of humor and often find things funny that other people don't, maybe sometimes in a way that annoys their parents from time to time. Creative children are okay with risk-taking, and they can tolerate looking foolish. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Creative children are open to new experiences and will push themselves through discomfort with novelty. They can handle discomfort. They can push themselves through the discomfort that comes from not knowing or being unclear or in uncharted territory. Creative children are often somewhat impervious to the thoughts of others or the opinions of others. They don't tend to fear social or other kinds of consequences. And often creative children, the most creative children, will end up a little bit as outcasts, particularly even in elementary and junior high years. We'll talk about that in just a second. Creative children can be intellectually playful and respond to assignments and tasks in fun or different ways. So they're given an assignment to do in school. The teacher asks for one thing, kid kind of answers the thing in a little bit different way, a little bit outside the box, different way of approaching problem solving. Creative children tend not to burden themselves with rules or even conscientious behavior. They may not be the most easy children to get along with. And often creative children have what we call a rage to master. And you hear this phrase a lot in the literature about child development, that they will have a rage to master, meaning that they will work at a problem over and over and over again, either as a way of solving the problem or because they're really trying to develop some type of skill. And you see this a lot with normal children in development, not necessarily even like the most creative children. I see this in my own son with Legos, and he'll just sit there and just work with Legos over and over and over again, because he has that particular kind of rage to master a particular domain. And although I've stated all of this as being true for creative children, it really is true for all people who are creative and all people who tend to wish to be, right? So the more that we fear the opinions or thoughts about other people, the more it causes us to hide our creativity and to hide our good ideas, which is why the literature is super clear that if you want to come up with a really bad idea, do a lot of brainstorming, because people will tend to censor themselves because we fear so much the opinions of other people and the things that we come up with. Now, young children are very creative. They have to be. They're working really hard to solve the problem of living, and they're working hard at play. Play is the work of children. They often don't have the language or the capacity to compare themselves to other people. So this is why you very young children are very playful and very creative. Play is always creative. And in fact, in psychology, one of the things we say is that one of the highest forms of psychological health is the capacity to play and to be playful. So an ability to play actually is a substantial marker of health and psychological wellness among adults. And my guess is that many of you have enjoyed having your own children, in part because it gives you the opportunity to be more playful in your own life. So little kids are masters at play and creativity. But research is clear that children lose some capacity to play as they get older. In elementary school, they begin to understand more of the social rules and attempt to fit into them. And they begin to lose that weirdness that comes from being playful and creative. In my work with 6th graders and 7th graders, they really try to avoid being weird in any way. But when I work with 9th graders, 10th graders, and high school, older high school students, they're okay at being a little different. Right? So during those conformity, high conforming years in middle school, it's really true of creativity too, that they tend to hide away some of their most creative sparks. Also, in that period of time, in those middle school years, gender roles tend to be the most rigid, and kids who are different often tend to get ostracized, maybe even bullied. But creativity, by definition, is non-conforming. And this is actually one of the reasons we tend to see high scores on creativity measures among autistic people, because they tend to be less burdened with thinking about the thoughts of other people. So they don't censor themselves quite as much. One of the things, just for those of you in the audience who are in my demographic, that on measures of creativity, middle-aged folks tend to do the best, which is something I remind the undergraduates of all the time. There's some convergence of fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence in middle age that seems to bring about greater creativity. There's an ability to think nimbly, to deeply understand a particular domain, and you just don't care so much about what people think about you anymore. So, when you think about creativity, it's not only something that we can all foster, but it is also something that grows and changes with us, and really has so much to do with the relationships that we have with other people and how welcoming that environment is for us to take risks and to step outside the box and to not fear any kind of repercussion that comes along. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we roll forward here. Okay, so let's talk about a creative process. The research literature on creativity outlines a number of different ways that creativity happens. Right? So you see a creative act, and you try to backwards engineer it to find out what that process is like. And basically, we come up with these kinds of process steps. That first, you have to identify the problem. Like, what is the problem I'm trying to solve here? And being really specific about what that problem is and how it might be solved is part of the process. The second step is incubation, that you just let things rest for a while. You give it time and you give it space, and I'll come back to that. Then finally, you do something, you solve the problem in some specific way. That's the execution step. And then finally, there's an evaluation where you look back over the process that you went through. You look back over the solution that you came up with and you see if it worked or if something could be improved or changed. Okay, but the important thing here is incubation. And in all the literature about creative problem solving or creative processes, incubation is probably the most important step. And it's often the one that we tend to skip over the most because incubation takes time. Time is needed to let things rest and to let our minds cook on things, maybe outside of our conscious awareness even. But in all theories and studies of creativity, there is time. You know, sometimes when I read a draft of a paper by a student, I say, you just need to delete this whole thing. You just throw it out, wait a week, and start over again. They hate that. But what I'm trying to do is to shake them out of this process a little bit and force them into a situation where they have to incubate, to really rethink the problem and to cook on it and give it time and space, because that incubation time is essential. Now, one of the things we know is that sometimes a time constraint can actually result in a really creative solution. Like you're working really quickly and you've got a problem to solve, and sometimes you come up with a really creative solution to that problem. Often, really, what the literature says about that situation is that doing things under pressure, solving a problem under pressure, are often more likely to be short-lived solutions rather than long-term solutions. So it may solve a problem in the midst of some kind of fire that you need to put out, but in terms of a long-term problem for a solution, it's often not the best. Okay? So again, time here is really important. Okay, so what helps foster creativity? And so if you're trying to be more creative yourself, and you're hoping that you have children who are more creative, or trying to even create a more creative society. So what are the things that really help foster creativity? Like one is travel. Probably, I mean, one of the most important things for fostering creativity in ourselves and in our children is travel. International travel, national travel, sometimes even regional travel. Anything that helps you get a sense of social constructionism, quite honestly, that's really what it comes down to, is that the ways that we do things and the ways that we think and the rituals that we have and the way that we go about our lives are all just social constructions and tend not to be the same in other places. And so getting a sense of that the rules are a little permeable and seeing the way that we live from a different perspective, and that the ways that we do things are pretty arbitrary and socially constrained rather than logically derived. Like once we get a sense of the arbitrariness of the rules that we live by, it also helps create a little bit of creative spark to see things a little bit differently. So travel is really important. And related to that, another thing that helps foster creativity is real exposure to diversity. Diversity of culture, diversity of life situation, diversity of any different way of being in the world. And that can happen even in your local community, just being around people who are different from us in some way, who think different, who live different, and have a different worldview. Those kinds of things really foster creativity. Another thing that fosters creativity, and sort of hinted to this so far, is time. Just having time fosters creativity. Doing things under pressure, when you're just running from task to task to task, often doesn't foster creativity. I mean, so many times I have my best ideas about work things and problems that I have to solve as a department chair. A lot of times I come up with the solutions of those things when I'm out running, when I'm just doing something else, and I have time for my mind to expand a little bit and to be outside in a different location. Another thing that helps foster creativity is a lack of consequences for failure. So being in an environment where you are encouraged to try and to fail often will breed more creativity. Now, here in the College of Creative Studies where I teach, there are no grades. It's the only part of the UCSB system where the scores or where the classes default to no grading. And what students earn is not a grade, but they earn different amounts of units depending upon the quality and amount of work that they produce. So, I'm teaching a class now in the College of Creative Studies, and nobody is getting a grade. They'll just get more or less units. And what that allows them to do is just play a little bit and to take risks and not worry about the difference between an A and a B. If they do the project and put the work into it, even if they do the project in a different way than I had anticipated, they still get the units. So there's a built-in system for them to be playful and to do things differently. And I've had this wonderful experience, and I haven't had it with undergraduates in a really long time, where a student will give up to give a presentation and they'll look at me and they'll say, I know what the assignment was, but I did something different. And often what they come up with is really pretty amazing and a lot of fun. And so, giving them this safety net where they don't have to be so afraid of failure really fosters creativity, intellectual growth, and a lot of excitement. Another thing that tends to foster creativity is unstructured play. It's unstructured play. Right? And the unstructured nature of the play is really important, that you allow children just to goof around, to be playful, to enjoy making up games and rules. Right? And often what children will do is they'll spend so much time negotiating the rules of the game that they run out of time to play it. So giving them those kinds of opportunities to be silly, to think outside the box, and to have imaginative play is really important. Another thing that fosters creativity is time in nature, just being outside and in trees and breathing fresh air. There's some really interesting studies where they have given people measures of creativity before and after they've gone hiking, for example, and they find that their scores on creativity measures are higher after they go hiking. It's really crazy. But even just a little bit of time every now and again outside in real nature increases scores in creativity measures. And finally, one of the things that really helps is an open and supportive environment. If a child is in a social system that fosters creativity and really allows them to be open with who they are and what it is that they think, this tends to support their expression of creativity. Okay, so those are the things that help foster or even grow creativity. And so let's talk about schools. Let's talk about schools. And it sounds like you guys are doing really marvelous and important things and have identified the importance of creativity in the children in your district. And kudos, you're way ahead of most people with that, because I think so many things have been lost in service of other pursuits. And I think too often creativity is one of them. But because research is really clear here that most schools engage in behaviors that are likely to reduce creativity. And you can hear that in the things that I just rattled off as being important for creativity. So things like time limits. So always having to do things under rigid time limits. And of course, there should be some time limits to teach children how to operate within timeframes, because that's an important skill. But sometimes there doesn't need to be. Other things that tend to occur in schools are social comparison and even competition. So competition for grades, competition for attention, competition around performance. Public evaluation, so kids having to display their work is often something that will reduce creativity because, again, it increases that self-consciousness. Many schools tend to reward routine behavior rather than interesting behavior. Okay? Schools reward routine behavior rather than interesting behavior. So essentially doing assignments or behaving in a way that the children are told to do rather than something that actually might be more interesting, more creative, often more problematic, but potentially more creative. There's too much focus on grades and performance. So any time that we put our emphasis on performance, we're going to reduce creativity. Even if the thing they're trying to perform is creative, if the emphasis is on merely the performance of it, it will also decrease the creativity of it. Too much homework. If there's too much homework and the homework is not creative in nature, that's reducing the time that children should have in order to do creative work. And finally, other things that schools tend to do is they tend to reduce playtime. Right? There's not enough play. Recesses have gotten shorter. There's not enough time for the kids to kind of goof around. And what we see in the literature is that children's playtime has dropped by 25 or even 30% over the past 2 decades. And schools aren't to blame for all of that, maybe not even most of that. But I think one of the things, and we'll come back to this a little bit more, is that one of the things I think we all need to think a lot more about is how playtime has really been reduced in a significant way since the time that we were children. Now, as a graduate school professor, for years I accepted doctoral students into our PhD program. That was one of the things that I did. We're a mentorship model program, and so I had full discretion over the students that I would pick for our program. And we would get 400 applications every year for about 10 spots, and I got to choose one of those people for one of those spots. And I've learned some things, or I learned some things throughout the time that I would admit students into our program. And here's where I make a plug for small liberal arts colleges. Because I realized at a certain point in my career, I stopped taking students who had come from large, super famous research universities. Students who had gone to large, super famous research universities for their undergraduate educations. You know, like I had students from the Ivies, I had students from Stanford, and I kind of stopped taking those students after a while. All these students had perfect GRE scores, and they all had 4.0 GPAs, and they were all like amazing and done amazing things. And many of them had really perfect grades in high school before that, along with their tutors and their pitching coaches and their piano teachers, and they were all really interesting. And I found that many of them were really good doers, but they weren't the best thinkers, meaning that I could tell them what to do, and they would do an amazing job of it. But they hadn't really fostered that ability to think outside the box or to go beyond what I had asked them to do, or even do something different because their idea was better than mine. And I began to notice that a less groomed student who had maybe gone to a small private college, or maybe who was even first in their family to attend college, they had a much brighter creative spark. And they were a lot less burned out from a lifetime of achievement chasing and performance orientation. Sometimes they were a little bit less polished, but what they would bring to my team was immeasurable. And I had talked to the students now about how I used to take risks and academically, and I would say, oh, like, here's the assignment, I did something else, or here is this thing that I thought of by myself. And so I wrote it up, and like, often the students will look at me like I have two heads, because they're afraid to take those kinds of risks academically if it might hurt their grade point averages. So all of this brings me to my point, is I think so much these days we're raising a generation of doers rather than thinkers. And more than that, we're raising a generation of stressed out overdoers who don't have time to think, and they orient to outcomes rather than processes. And what we know, and I think we all have a greater sense of this, better sense of this than we did even just a few years ago, is that kids are really stressed out. And over a third of kids are going to have a diagnosable anxiety disorder by the time that they're 18 years old. The median age at which a child is diagnosed with an anxiety disorder nowadays is 6 years old. 83% of teenagers report that school is a significant source of stress, and 25% of kids say that they don't eat because they don't have time. And the kids in middle school ages have stated that they are more stressed by academics than any other stressor, including bullying or problems with their families. They were stressed out by grades, by school, and by too much homework. What we see is that depression in kids and teenagers has increased by 70% since 2013. And that number went even higher during the middle of the pandemic years. There's been an increase in adolescent suicides in the past 10 to 15 years, an increase in drug use. And it's really clear that kids are struggling like they haven't before. And all of these problems were getting worse and worse and worse, even before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic happened, it was sort of a logarithmic growth of distress. And we think of anxiety and depression as being disorders of distress, that there's a mismatch between a person's capacity to cope and the demands of their environment. So as the demands get higher and higher on kids because of an achievement orientation, they're starting to break down and expressing themselves through anxiety and depression. And so one of the reasons that I think that this is happening is something I call the three mythologies of good college, good job, and good life. And we take these one at a time and we talk about what does it mean to go to a good college and the pressure that teens feel and even younger kids feel to get into a good college is really important for us to take a look at and to really think about. And there is the sense that there is a scarcity of college admission spots and things are getting way more competitive than they were. And what's true is that overall, college admissions are not more competitive than they were 15 years ago. It's true that some colleges, about 150 of them to be precise, about 150 colleges out of the 4,000 colleges in America are way more competitive than they used to be to get into. UCSB is one of those colleges. But overall, rates of admissions to colleges haven't changed. And in fact, most colleges are admitting more and more students. And in fact, most colleges admit most students who apply. And although the top colleges are getting more and more applications, most students who apply to college get into college. And in fact, some really wonderful colleges, those little liberal arts colleges I was talking about before, are getting fewer and fewer applications and starting to have some trouble with their admissions. So college selectivity doesn't make for a better life. So there's some small benefit between the selectivity and financial benefit of going to a college, a particular college, but that's mostly for non-majority kids and first-generation students. And it's the personal characteristics of the student matter a lot more than the college that they went to. In fact, I say there's always more variance in student than there is in college, which means that for most people, most of you, your child is not going to be happier in their jobs, wealthier, or have a better educational experience at Stanford than they will at Cal State Dominguez Hills. Remember that the selectiveness of a college is based mostly on the reputation score, and the reputation has a lot to do with advanced research that the faculty does and the grants that they get, which has nothing to do with the teaching or things that actually impact the lives of the undergraduates. Because famous research professors are often really crappy teachers if they teach any classes at all. And so, which all sort of sets a kid up to want this notion of a good job. So a good college then serves a good job. And usually when a kid means a good job, they mean a high-paying one. And nearly every kid I ask these days, when I say, like, what kind of job do you want, or what kind of future do you want, they say, I want to make a lot of money. And that focus on outcomes is so different than what we saw 20 or 30 years ago. And they found that trend in the literature that kids talk more and more about wanting to be rich now than they ever used to. In prior generations, kids were much more likely to talk about wanting to get a good education, finding meaningful work, or wanting to do good things for society. But the focus now is on outcomes. And why shouldn't it be? They're taught to make the best grades, to be the best athlete, to get the best scores, to do the most extracurriculars. These are outcome-based value systems. Probably most of you, or probably many of you, have jobs that pay you well, but don't really give you a sense of fulfillment or purpose. I'm sure that's true for all of us some of the time, but it's probably true for a lot of people a lot of the time. So reminding our kids, or keeping our focus on what it is that we truly value, because in the end, it probably shouldn't be the finances. Research is clear that money doesn't buy happiness. So here's a slide, and a number of research studies have done the same kind of work, where they've looked at the relationship between income and things like happiness or overall sense of fulfillment, and that's what's being measured here. And what you see here is that happiness and income are correlated up to about $95,000 a year. And granted, that's about 3 times as much money per year than most people make in this country. But above $95,000, there's no relationship between finances and happiness. I've worked with some really miserable billionaires. Sure, there's some relaxation in anxiety about money, but that's not happiness. And I get it when I talk to college students and high school students in particular, I get it. The up and coming generation is likely to face more employment restriction than before, and they're often saddled with more debt than prior generations. And no wonder they want to be rich when it seems like good enough jobs are hard to come by. But at the end of the day, we want to give our kids a good work ethic and a strong sense of values about their work. As my mom used to say, there's never shame in hard work. And we used to continue to foster pride in work rather than focusing on the financial payoff of that work. And finally, for the kids who come to me and they say, I want to get into a good college, to have a good job so I can get a good life. I say, well, what does it mean when you say good life? When patients tell me that they want to be happy, I say, you don't get to have that. Not all the time. Nobody does. Because no matter what, you're going to suffer and you'll be sad, and that's okay. That's a part of life. Because what we want is fulfillment, not money, not happiness, but fulfillment. Good relationships, sense of purpose, being at some degree of peace in the world. None of these things are related to money. Those are process things, not outcome things. And what I would say is that the focus on outcomes has led to a reduction in child independence and child creativity. We're all well-meaning parents, but the well-meaningness has meant that we're much more likely to watch and control, structure, and maintain our children's environments. We're so focused on the child's future that we neglect what it is that they need now. A desire to create a rich experience for our kids means that children have less free time, less play time, and less creativity time than they need. And the reduction in independence and freedom has increased their anxiety and reduced a sense of self-efficacy. Creativity is born of a freedom to take risks and to rely on one's own capacity to solve problems. Too much oversight and pressure reduces that freedom. So what do we want? We want to raise, we want to raise creative kids. If we want to raise creative kids, we need to focus on processes rather than outcomes. Children need time to play. Research is clear that play is an essential component to creativity. Play with them. It's good for you and your creativity too. One of the best days in my creativity class is when I march over to the classroom with a big box of Legos and I just dump them out on the table and I watch 21-year-olds play like they are children. It's glorious. And they talk about how that experience then changes the rest of their day for them. And they just feel lighter and more energized. Children need to be able to fail. They need to be in environments where there is no evaluation that encourages their innovation encourages them to take leaps. So we need to stop focusing so much on achievement and performance and structure and time. Let your children be bored. If necessity is the mother of invention, boredom is the mother of creativity. And often, like, I get it, sometimes boredom means that they start being more destructive or obnoxious or in your business a little bit more. But what will happen eventually is if you allow them to be bored long enough, they will eventually figure out ways to be creative. Finally, we need to focus on the values. Focus on values of giving to others, values of work-life balance, values of education rather than grades, values of a life meaning and experience rather than money and hollow versions of success. The greatest act of creativity is the creation of a life that is fulfilling, values-oriented, and marked by service, relationships, and giving. And that's what it means to have a good life. Thank you for your time and your attention. I believe that Charlene is going to come back and monitor the chat for us.
Well, thank you, Steve. That was really incredible. Creativity is born of a freedom to take risks. Boy, that is a statement that every parent needs to put on the refrigerator, right?
All of us do.
All of us do. All of us do, right? So, Steve, I am wondering, well, I was really glad that you included the word joyful in the title of your talk. I think in our parental and school-based rush to succeed, that we've forgotten that childhood is supposed to be about joy, freedom, and exploration. Is that how you see it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that at each phase of our life, we need joyful exploration. I think that is something that is common to all people, regardless of age and phase of life. And to be exposed to all the different ways to be excited and joyful and have newness in their life. We often hear the phrase, have a child's mind or a childlike mind when approaching a problem. And it really is a way of talking about that openness and that excitement and that appreciation of novelty. And so I think that the more that we can foster that throughout our lives, the better off we all are.
Well, we were so pleased that Allison Lanier, Associate Superintendent, brought you and this talk to this audience, because we're really kind of seeing here in Silicon Valley an attack on play. Palo Alto has rebranded Recess Brain Break and cut lunchtime from 40 minutes to 20 minutes. And as a former early childhood educator, it breaks my heart. What do you say to that?
Breaks my heart too. Yeah, I get the tension. I get the tension where the schools are. Like, I understand the school's perspective is that, they are beholden to more and more desire on one part that their children achieve certain things relative to other schools or other districts or other children or what have you. I get that. And there's only a finite amount of time that children are in school. And so where do you cut? And often it's playtime, it's lunchtime, or the arts is the other place that often will get axed in service of, the hard science or the STEM or that kind of thing. And I think it is a real loss, because the truth is the STEM's going to get better if you got more recess. If you actually believe the research on this stuff, that the brain work is going to go a lot more smooth if you have more brain breaks. But it should just be play rather than just this escape from tedium. So I think, finding ways in school, and you can be playful with science, you can be playful with math. These things can be playful too.
Yeah.
Rather than just this, absorbing of facts and information and production of output.
So, Steve, we live in an area where everybody's busy. You know this, parents are busy, kids are busy. What do you think about camps or other summer-based activities like drama, art that encourage creativity, but maybe pretty structured? How do you feel about those kinds of experiences?
I think that's great as long as it's not the only thing. I mean, if it's the only thing and if it's the only place where there is time for that, great. But I don't think it should be the only thing, and it's not a substitute It's not a substitute for the other thing too, because you always have to remember that those environments are also environments with a lot of evaluation, a lot of performance, a lot of eyes on a child who may not always want to be so demonstrative with the kind of gifts that they have. And so, a lot of this, as is true for all parenting things, is you got to know the kid that you have.
Mm-hmm.
The kid that you have may be the kind of kid who needs to be creative by themselves with a magic marker and a pad of paper, and other kids might need to be creative on a stage. And so, putting one kid in the wrong environment for that could be, detrimental at worst.
So, during the pandemic, we heard about kids taking up really creative pursuits, baking, cooking, learning a language, playing a musical instrument. And that was wonderful. Now we're all back in school. What do you say about trying to encourage kids to do those sorts of activities even now? What do you think about that?
Great. I think it's great. And so some of it is, I've been amazed at how quickly everything went back to normal. And in some ways that's great. Like we just kind of picked back up and went on with it. But I think you're right. A lot of people got a lot more creative, not just children. I mean, I've heard all sorts of adults who are just, they got 5 or 6 strings on a guitar going at the same time, and they're pretty excited about that. But then as soon as they could go back to work and back to the office, I think some of those things fell by the wayside. But in my more optimistic moments, I do think the pandemic was useful in that regard, in reminding us of the importance of downtime and play time and creativity time. And my wish is that we kind of continued on a little bit more with that. And I'm afraid that we haven't as much as we probably should have.
Yeah, good point, Steve. So here a parent asks, how about online or computer gaming? To what extent would that have positive impacts on creativity, or could it?
I got to leave. I can't answer that question. No, it is the question. It is the question that I often get. Really, regardless of the topic that I'm talking about, the question comes about online something, and that is the parenting question of this era. I think is, what do we do about screens? Because in some ways, online gaming is wonderful. It really is great. Provided it's Roblox and Minecraft and those sorts of things where you're doing creative things. If you're just shooting up a bunch of folks as your friends, like research is really clear on that. That's really bad. But if it's the social part, like that social part of online gaming can be really important for a kid, but it's not creative in the same way that we think about creative problem solving, right? At least for the most part. There are some games that are very creative and require a lot of imagination, a lot of thinking outside the box, and riddles and puzzles and all those sorts of things. And I think those are pretty good. But part of the thing that actually makes for real long-term creativity is just engagement with your world. Just engagement with your world. And screens are a part of that for our children and for ourselves. That is part of it. And I would say that can be a really useful part of it. But it can't be all of it. So, it depends upon the game, depends upon the time, and it depends upon the child and what it is that they're doing.
I mean, I think back often about, I was a single mom when my kids were little, and they had to come up with things to do. My daughter's very creative. She's now a design researcher, but in the 6th grade, her Halloween costume was a garbage can, literally real garbage can with the hat, the lid. Everybody else is a Disney princess. And I really think there is a connection between a kid who's willing to dress as a garbage can and a kid who's willing to take risks. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. No question. Garbage can kids always come in.
It was really different in a sea of Disney princesses. So,
but sorry to interrupt you, Charlene, but I think, as parents, we also have to monitor our feelings about that kind of thing.
mm-hmm.
Right? So, my daughter is in 1st grade. My daughter is on the autism spectrum. And so she kind of marches to the beat of a different drummer. The other day we watched Superman. And the next day at school, she wanted to wear a Superman costume. And, this is like 2 weeks ago. She wanted to dress up in a Superman costume that she had. And I really had to watch myself going, oh, is this going to be okay? Or the kid's going to make fun of her because she's wearing a costume? And I just let her go. And right? And it was fine. The teacher was cool with it, and everybody was pleased that she.
That's good. That's really good. So here's a thoughtful question from a parent. Says, while I appreciate the significance of eliminating a score-based measurement system in schools and the positive impact it can have on students, I'm eager to explore alternative approaches for motivating children to invest time in their studies, devoid of relying on a scoring system. Do you have any sort of short advice around that? I see the questions now that we have just a few minutes, the questions are pouring in.
No, it's a great question. And, you know, some of it is really trying to find something that captures the child's imagination. I get that there's a motivating force behind grades and scores. And eventually they do need those grades and scores. Being evaluated on performance is a part of life. That is a useful aspect for them to get a handle on. But, you know, for most of their childhood, those grades and scores don't really mean a whole lot. They're not meaningful. And so getting a child really interested in something, or letting them kind of do the bare minimum and just deciding like, oh, this is good enough for now. This is good enough for now, and having some oversight on that. But it's a tough question. It really is.
It really is. So here's something that a lot of parents are experiencing. They ask, how about watching YouTubers play games instead of the kid playing games? My kids love to watch YouTubers playing games, and I always stop them. Should I?
Well, the more you make it illegal, the more it goes underground and becomes more sketchy. So, you know, what I would say is like, you don't need to stop them, but I would set time limits on it. You know, everything in moderation can be okay. I don't have any idea why someone would want to watch somebody else play a video game. But I get the kids like it and they think it's interesting and fun. And there's a whole esports world out there that I can't make any sense of. But I get that it's real and that people like that. So I would say, yeah, limit it because it is second level passive entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, eliminating it altogether sets up all sorts of power struggles.
Well, and as a sports fan, you know, I do love watching baseball and basketball, so I get that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Steve, we've come to the end of our time together, but you've talked about a lot of things, interesting things for us to think about. Given everything that you're seeing in your clients and your students, what gives you hope today?
That's a great question. You know, just the fact that we're having this conversation and that people have showed up to engage in the conversation, I think that brings me hope. And, you know, I like to think that in my more hopeful moments, I think that we are moving towards something that is more values driven, more people driven, more relationship driven. And the more that we can share our system of values with our children, I think the better off we're going to be.
I think so too. So really, thank you everyone who was with us tonight. Thank you, Associate Superintendent Allison Lanier, for bringing us together tonight. And especially thank you, Dr. Steve Smith, for a brilliant conversation. We'll be talking about this for a long time. So take care, everybody. So glad to have you with us tonight. We hope to see you again soon. Good night, everybody.